Welcome to the Uncommon Sense School. This being our first class, I should probably introduce myself. My name is Dr. Jason Baumsteiger. I'm a former college professor. I'm also a personal trainer. I'm a mentor. I'm an author, and I'm also in sales. But the important thing is that today we're going to go over the basic tenets of what makes the school what it is. This is going to be a fairly simple intro. We're going to get you rolling with all of the things that go on with the class because there's a lot that we're going to cover. But to start with, let's just talk with what is the purpose of the school. And the purpose of the school is to get you focused on reviewing what I'm going to call your 4 basic tenets that you need to know that you're not learning in traditional school, right? So as you go through the course, you're going to find that I've broken each of these sections into various classes. Each classes are about, I don't know, about 25 to 40 minutes in length, depending upon what I'm talking about. It's going to make it really easy for you to just kind of pop onto topics that you're interested in. Or what I recommend, and as the school has been built, I want you to go class by class. There's an order and a structure to it. And I want you to be able to get everything that is out there in the order that which I've set it all up. So hopefully you're going to grab onto that, but it's your school. You use it as you see fit. Now, the Uncommon Sense tenets are fairly straightforward. The first being, what do we have? All right, the introduction. That's what we're doing today. Then we're going to move on to health. We're going to move on to money. We're going to move on to survival. And finally, we're going to deal with career and leadership before we finally conclude with a couple of finishing remarks. But as you can see, based on the slides up above, there's a lot to cover. And a lot of these topics are something that maybe you get in school, maybe you don't. My experience has been, after all the years of doing this, that you're not getting what you need to know. And this being uncommon sense, we're going to teach it in a way that makes it common for you. So at times it might seem almost insulting of your intelligence. Well, that's a good thing. That means that you're already familiar with what we're trying to work through, and you're already comfortable with working through that kind of idea. The problem that we have, and the reason for the school's existence, people aren't covering this stuff, and we're making assumptions, and that's what we're going to talk about initially. But before we get to that, let's talk about the introduction in terms of what I'm going to teach you today. That's fairly straightforward. We're going to learn about knowledge, we're going to learn about critical thinking, and we're going to learn about awareness. And these are the important things that you need to be up to speed with before we can really go and embrace the rest of the class. Why are we starting here, of all places? Doesn't this seem fairly redundant? Don't I already know what knowledge is? Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't, right? So what we're going to learn about is not just, let's see, how can I explain this? It's not just what you learn, it's how you learn it. And most of you don't really know how to learn. You think you do because the schools have kind of prepped you in a way, but you've basically just gone along with what they've told you. You haven't really spent any time to think about how do you specifically learn material and what is the expectation that you have from that material. So what we're going to do first and foremost is we're not going to make assumptions. Assumptions are a major problem we have in the world today. And there's a fairly simple reason why assumptions are out there, right? It's basically, we've already made up our minds about what the material is, which is probably what a lot of you are doing here now. You already feel like, no, I already know what this is. I don't need to go over this. I've got it all figured out. And that is one of the fundamental problems. You don't know. You think that you do, but you've never really tested it. You've never really gone out there and figured out, do I actually understand this material or do I not? I just assume that I do. And the reason for that is when you make assumptions, that leads to expectations. Expectations usually kind of drop on their head a lot of the time, and then you have disappointment, which leads to sadness or bad feelings. And suddenly what you thought you knew, you don't. So instead of testing it early on, you end up chasing it later and having an emotional reaction to the information that you're being taught. So what I want you to think of is assumptions are essentially the perceived truth without proof. And what I mean by that is most of us struggle with, because especially nowadays with so much material out there, we have what's called decision fatigue, which is our mind is trying to figure out what exactly is going on. There's too much coming in. How much do I keep? How much do I throw out? And so in order to do that, we take little pieces of information and we kind of formulate them in our brains, and we kind of have a feeling like that's truth, right? We really put it together. We don't really know what we're doing or why we did that. It's just kind of our brain's defense mechanism to help us with the bombardment of all this information. And so we form these assumptions. And these assumptions lead to expectations and disappointment because it's not proven. You don't actually know that. You don't know that that's true, but it feels like it is. And that's why you keep dismissing so much of the material you hear. It's just your brain working to keep up with the bombardment of social media and all the other fun stuff that we keep hitting our brains with. So what we need to start with then is, what is knowledge? Like, what do I actually know? Now, knowledge, if you look at the slide up above, you'll see that there's a map. And so if I said, my address is blah, 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 and I rattle it off, you would know what the address is. But does that mean you know how to get there? No, it doesn't. It just means you know where the address is. Knowing how to get there is something completely different. And so the address is just information. The knowledge is the ability to get from here to whatever that address is. That's what we're trying to focus on. And so what I want you to think of, and I'm going to read it because it's very important: facts, information, and skills acquired by a person through experience or education, the theoretical or practical understanding of a subject. That's the first definition. The second is awareness or familiarity gained by experience of a fact or situation. All right? So why did I spend the time to be so succinct with my definition? Well, when you actually go and you break it down, some of that definition you learn in school, and some of that definition you learn in life. And so they're two very different things. And what happens is you go to school and you think that you're learning both, and you're not. You're really only learning one. And why? Because that's what the schools are set up for. They can't do everything. I think sometimes we give schools too much credit. Like the teachers can just magically teach us everything there is to know. And that's just not fair. And it's not realistic. And so what we're going to try and do is augment that with practical knowledge, an actual working understanding of how things go. And that comes through experience. That comes through your life, right? So I might teach you that the stove is hot, but then when you actually go up and feel it, are very different things. So in class, you're like, yes, stoves are hot. And then one day you're working really fast and you grab something on the stove that's hot. Now you really know what it's like. Knowledge, as we've just spent time explaining, is, in the school sense, mostly just facts. They're going to teach you facts: scientific fact, historical facts, English facts, math facts. You're basically getting all these facts and you're going to shove them in your brain. And then they're going to ask you, what were those facts again? And you're going to give them an answer. And you're either going to basically know it or not know it. But do you really know how it all works? Or are you just memorizing a whole bunch of stuff? Well, the truth is, you're probably just memorizing a whole bunch of stuff, right? Which we all have to do. That's how we start. It's a basis for all of our learning. But you're going to leave school and you're going to think that you're knowledgeable, that you really understand how this stuff works. And you don't, because you haven't tested it. You just have a whole bunch of facts up in your brain, right? So being able to know how things work versus having facts in your brain lead people to make the wrong conclusions when it comes to how life works, right? You're going to make an assumption. See, there's that word, and we're going to use a lot in this school. You're going to make this assumption that you actually understand this thing, and you're going to go tell somebody how it works, when you actually really don't know how it works. You just know a bunch of facts that school taught you, okay? The last thing is that to gain knowledge and the testing that comes with it, if you do it long enough and well enough, you'll actually gain wisdom. And so for the context of this school, knowledge is something you gain after doing something, but wisdom is something that comes over time. So we'll just call it knowledge over time as you gain wisdom. And it's an important distinction, even though a lot of people like to conflate the two. So I don't know if you can see this or not. Everybody tell me, what does this picture look like? Boat. Some people think boat. Some people think spaceship. Yeah. It's kind of hard to tell what you're actually looking at. And that's intentional. And that's a really cool way that the artist has kind of done this photograph. But if you can look at it more carefully, and maybe those of you at home, you'll be able to tell what this is. It's an underpass, right? It's an overpass of a bridge over your head. All you're doing is looking at some stretch, probably in Florida, of a road traveling over your head. But when shot in black and white with those various shadows, it's hard to kind of tell what it is. Maybe you think it's just a spaceship landing in the middle of the water. I don't know. The important thing is that if I just kind of glossed over it, it might go in your brain and out. But if I asked you to critically think about it, which is what I just did, you might have to put stuff together as to why you think it is what it is, right? And so you're trying to identify changes, differences, or patterns that allow you to actually figure out what the thing is, instead of just, it's this. Because it's not inherently obvious what that is. That's intentional. That's part of the fun about art, right? But as the material you're reading comes across your desk, shall we say, in your brain, it challenges you if you choose to. But if you don't, it just goes through and right on to the next thing. But critical thinking is actually slowing it down and actually taking a look at it. Like, what am I working with? What does it mean? Why is it there? Right? And maybe it is exactly what you thought it was, and you let it keep going right on through. Maybe you might be like, you know what? I don't need any of this information. Let it go on through. Or maybe you're going to grab little pieces of information that you didn't realize your brain was actually picking up, your eyes, your ears, and all of that. And that is essentially what critical thinking is. It's a way to basically help us identify threats, helps us to understand material more thoroughly, and allows us to actually engage more with what's going on around us, right? But for reasons I'm not exactly sure, most of the schools are skipping critical thinking. And a lot of, well, let's be very honest. The media doesn't really want you doing critical thinking either, right? They don't want you to really think about this stuff. They want you to just believe what they say. And so me coming in and teaching you this probably seems counterintuitive. I'm starting out the school by telling you to critically think about the professor. Yes, I am. I'm asking you to judge me in a good way. I want you to judge me because I want you to look at the material that I'm giving you, and I want you to take it back and process it and grind it around and see if what I'm telling you matches with what your feelings are, what your experiences have been, or what you can find elsewhere, and see if you can make the two align. And then you're getting away from assumptions. Okay? What critical thinking is not, though, it's not criticism. It's not inherently negative, right? Everybody's like, oh, critical, critical. No, critical just means analytical. I'm just looking at it more thoroughly. It's not, I'm looking at it with anger or malice. I'm not picking sides. I'm not being harsh. I'm just simply taking more in from that material. I'm giving it a couple of times over. It's like if you read a book more than one time, you're going to find stuff that you missed the first time. That's what critical thinking is. I'm going to take this in for a while. I'm going to digest it and see if there's more there than just my, which is what most of us do. Haven't you done it? I'm sure you have, right? So critical thinking becomes a powerful tool in our arsenal, and that's part of what this school is about. We're giving you tools that you can basically keep in your backpack. That is something you take along on your journey, right? If you've ever gone backpacking, and I'm going to talk about backpacking a lot in this class because it lines up so well with how life works, which is you need to initially figure out, well, what do you have in your pack? And then what do you still need? Because once you start hiking, that's pretty much all you got. Everything else is just hope that maybe something shows up. Water, food, I don't know, a map. You think it's just going to be lying there on the side of the road? No. So what you take with you is what you have. And so if you're going to go out into life and you're going to get outside of school and life's going to start throwing stuff at you, this is what you got. This is all you got. So one of the most powerful tools you can use is critical thinking. But, there's always a but. Critical thinking is not something you're going to be able to unsee. Once you see it, once you deal with it, once you start using this tool, you can't go back to the more simplistic way that maybe you were operating on, right? The classic phrase is ignorance is bliss. Once you start critical thinking, you're going to find that so much of your world is not what you thought it was, because you're going to start seeing things that you didn't know were there, and you're not going to know how to process them. And that's part of why we're starting today with that, because that's what the entire course is going to be. Critical thinking about things that you thought you knew, that you assumed you knew, when you really don't. And it's going to, some of you, it might emotionally mess with you a little bit. It's going to kind of mess with your mind. But it's not a bad thing, right? It just allows you to differentiate the sheep from the shepherds. The shepherds have to look out over everything. Is that a wolf? Is it a threat? Is that a cliff? Is there good grass? How late till I have to be in the pen? All of those things are what shepherds do. What do the sheep do? They just eat the grass. They just eat the grass, and they just hope everything goes to plan. And that, unfortunately, is a lot of people. They're just eating grass. And I'm not trying to be insulting. I'm just saying that when you go through school, you just kind of sit in class, and the teacher pours information into your brain, and you just kind of say, yep, and then you go about your day. You don't really spend time with it. You're not becoming a shepherd. Shepherds all have experience. How did you get experience? Well, you had to lose some sheep. And that's going to be the painful part. That's what I was kind of referencing. It's going to kind of mess you up a little bit. You think the shepherds sleep comfortably like the sheep do? No, they do not. That's part of knowledge. You know what's actually possible instead of the ignorance that comes with being sheep. So for critical thinking, though, after you're done with critical thinking, I need you to start applying something unique, and that's action. You have to do something with it. So as a former scientist, I could form all the hypotheses I wanted about information. I could be like, yep, it's going to be this. I'm positive it's going to be that. None of it matters in the scientific world until you test it, and then test it again, and then test it again. And that's how science actually works. It's the series of tests over and over again that confirm the same outcome. Then you can eventually get to, if you can do it long enough, a scientific law. But if you can start getting pretty good at it, you get scientific theory. And those things, people like to treat them as some sort of separate entity, like, oh, I don't do science. Yes, you do. Your whole life is science. It's a science project. It's why a systems biologist like myself can come teach you about life stuff, because they're not different. These aren't different concepts. All of biology is the same. Systems are systems. And your ability to critical think and apply and test and then think about it again is something that I need you to learn. And so I've made this very rudimentary diagram where I'm trying to explain how you learn, how you gain knowledge, and then how you eventually gain wisdom. And as we've been basically going over, you're going to start with information, and then once you have that information, you're going to start thinking about it, critically thinking about it. Okay, critically thinking about it. What does this mean? What does it do? Why am I having this? Why do these go together? Why do they not go together? But what happens for most of us is we actually get caught in a loop, which I call the overthinking loop. And it's kind of demonstrated up here, which is you start critically thinking about it, you realize, I don't really have enough information. I'm not comfortable. I don't really want to test it yet. I'm going to go back and get more information. And then you think about it and you're like, no, I'm still not comfortable, so I'm going to go back. And most people never get out of this in their lives. They just keep gathering more information. They think about it some, oh, I'm still not comfortable. I'm still not comfortable. They never test it because they're afraid they're going to be wrong. And their emotions are preventing them from actually growing in their learning and their knowledge. They never get to knowledge. They just get more information over and over again. So now they're huge piles of information. They're an encyclopedia. Throw me an encyclopedia. Does that mean I can still get from point A to point B? No. It still does. I don't know how to do that unless I go and do it, right? You can explain it to me, but how am I going to learn it better than anything? I got to go do it. And that's what we're trying to say. You got to go test it. You got to go do action. That's where the knowledge is going to come. But then you can make the second mistake, which is you do the action, and then you just kind of take whatever the answer is and give up. You're like, that's good enough for me. I don't need to know. And you don't really think about it. What did it mean? Was it correct? Was your hypothesis correct? Was it not? Did you make some sort of mistake? Did you have assumptions? I know we hate those. And so you might start critically thinking and then realize I had a total misassumption. You got to go back to the information. Well, okay, that's a good thing, right? But more than likely, if you actually think about the outcome, you're going to gain some sort of knowledge. And it might be knowledge you didn't really want. It might not be the result that you were looking for, but that unto itself is knowledge. You realized that the assumption that you had was wrong, right? Or you realize I don't have enough information, or I don't know enough, or I learned this one thing, but I really need to add to it. I need to make it bigger. I need to expand. I need to provide more, and that's when, what are you going to do? You're going to loop back around to information. You're going to go through this process again. This is learning. It's the constant adding to your knowledge base, constant adding to your knowledge base. And if you keep doing this and you keep looping back on the large scale and not the small scale of overthinking, you're eventually going to develop wisdom, right? Knowledge over time. And that's the most important thing, because should you be lucky enough, maybe you eventually get to wisdom, and then you can even move on to a new topic. Maybe you can develop something that, one of my favorite characters is Sherlock Holmes. What he uses is deductive reasoning, which is he solves all of these crimes because he's so knowledgeable about everything. He's able to eliminate all possibilities that make zero sense and narrow it down to just one or two things. And then he goes out and tests those one or two things, and voila, he solves the crime. And that's a brilliant part of life. You're going to seem almost clairvoyant when you get to that stage. But everybody just assumes that you're going to have deductive reasoning. And as I've tried to show you on my very simple diagram, you got to go through this a whole lot of times before you're really going to get there. This is called a decision tree. And it's a fairly simple way that you might do a standard operating procedure if you were trying to put together a system, right? This is a rudimentary way of trying to think about an idea. And the reason I'm trying to belabor the point here is it's so valuable for you to think about your learning process when you're out there. You need to become aware, and we're going to talk about that here shortly. You need to become aware of how your mind works, how you take in information, and what it takes for you to actually learn something. The average person, I've been told, takes 7 times with material before they can really start to internalize it. 7 times. That's a lot, right? That's not something that just happens. So you think that 1 or 2 times is going to somehow lock that into your brain? No, it's not. Or just information is going to lock into your brain. So let's just go through this decision tree very, very briefly, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through what I mean when I say you're starting with information. You're then going to move to critical thinking, just like we looked at before. But now, have I thought about this information? If you haven't thought about the information, you're making an assumption. If you have thought about the information, the next thought should be, am I overthinking this? Something I deal with all the time. Because if I am overthinking it, then I'm going to go back and get more information. That's how I know. I'm constantly seeking more information because I'm afraid to move on to testing. But if I'm not overthinking and I have thought about the material, I can move to testing. And then the next question I want to ask myself, is this test going to help? Am I actually going to learn something, right? Will it further my understanding? If the answer is no, once again, you're making an assumption. It just means you haven't really thought about that well, because testing always does something for you. And if you're like, nope, there's no reason for me to test this, it's absolute, I know it for a fact, don't do that. Don't do that. Instead, test it. And then think about what were the results. Maybe you were 100% correct. Maybe you weren't. But the important thing was you gained that knowledge. But then you have to ask yourself, what did the knowledge tell me? Did I get something wrong and I need to test more? Did I have the completely wrong information and I need to go all the way back and get more information? Or was I correct? And then through life, as you go along, you're going to do it again. Does the knowledge hold up over time? So if you run into this piece of information again, does it give you the same pattern that you did before? If it does, you're developing wisdom. If it doesn't, you're missing something. And I need you to keep looking at what you're missing. What you're missing, the details. The details matter when it comes to learning something. Because one of the greatest ways that a person actually learns something is to learn to teach it. Because when you teach it, you realize if I can't explain this very well, no one's going to understand it. It's not going to happen. They're not going to really understand what I mean because I don't know what I mean. And so there's a brilliant part about finding material and learning how you would teach it to somebody else. So even that's what group study is about, by the way. For those of you who are always like, why do you want me to pair up and get a study group? Because if you can teach your friend how to do this, then you understand it. But if all you do is just give them information and they just look at you, you're just an encyclopedia. You haven't done anything. You don't really know.